Let's dive into a world where the American colonies lost the Revolutionary War. Spoiler alert, it's a lot more British, and we'd probably all have terrible dental care. First things first, if the British had won, there would be no United States as we know it today. Instead of the United States of America, we'd all be part of British North America, politely sipping tea while complaining about the weather. George Washington? Sorry, no cool guy on the dollar bill. He'd be that guy who led a failed rebellion and maybe ended up with his face on a commemorative plate in some obscure English museum. And Thomas Jefferson? He might be known as the bloke who wrote an angry letter that no one cared about. The Founding Fathers? More like the failed fathers, just a footnote in British history books. Forget about the US Constitution, Congress, and the President. Nope, in this timeline we'd be ruled by the British Parliament. King George III would be the big cheese. Instead of presidential elections, we'd be following British law, enjoying a nice monarchy, and probably watching parliamentary debates where politicians yell at each other in fancy accents. Much more sophisticated than American politics, right? And let's not even talk about the 4th of July. There would be no fireworks, no hot dogs, and no excuse to wear ridiculous red, white, and blue outfits. Instead, you'd be celebrating King George's birthday or some other royal occasion. Maybe there'd be a holiday for Most Improved Colony. Instead of singing the national anthem, you'd be belting out God Save the King at sporting events. Super Bowl, try Super Teacup. And baseball? Nope. Cricket all the way. Imagine long summer afternoons watching a sport where the game lasts for days, and no one understands it anyway. Fun, right? Speaking of tea, let's get real. Remember the Boston Tea Party, where colonists dramatically threw tea into the harbor? Yeah, that wouldn't have happened. Tea would still be the ultimate beverage of choice. There would be no Starbucks on every corner. You'd be visiting your local tea room, chatting over Earl Grey and discussing the latest British royal drama. And yes, there would be scones. Coffee drinkers? Well, you might have to sneak your espresso like it's contraband. Now, let's talk about westward expansion. You know all those cowboys, saloons, and wagon trains that shaped the Wild West? Not so much. The British government had already put a stop to westward expansion with the Proclamation of 1763. So without independence, that whole Manifest Destiny thing, it would have been more like Manifest Maybe. Cities like Chicago, St. Louis, and San Francisco might have taken a lot longer to pop up. Instead, we'd all be living in small colonial settlements, dreaming of crossing the Appalachians someday. Internationally, things get even more interesting. Without the United States throwing its weight around, Britain would have stayed the dominant force on the world stage. The British Empire would have been even more massive, and there would be no United States to challenge its influence. So, instead of the US showing up in both world wars to save the day, Britain would have been leading the charge. You'd probably still be driving on the left side of the road too, which is, honestly, just confusing. And don't forget about those other revolutions. The American Revolution inspired all sorts of rebellions, like the French Revolution in 1789 and the Latin American independence movements. Without a successful American Revolution, all these people might have stayed put for a while. The ideals of liberty and democracy would have taken a little longer to catch on. Who needs freedom when you've got tea? Culturally, things would be different too. Hollywood might not even exist. Imagine a world without blockbuster movies or Marvel superheroes. Instead, we'd be watching lots of British period dramas. Our cinematic heroes wouldn't be cowboys or superheroes. They'd be Victorian-era aristocrats having long, dramatic conversations in drawing rooms. And instead of Hollywood glamour, we'd have, well, more subtle British charm. Lots of tea breaks between scenes, of course. And now it's time for you to subscribe.